my Francophone countries where I work. It's really working hand in hand with governments, with USAID and with other partners to improve the infrastructure of health financing and governance in order to improve health outcomes for the populations, and really keeping that laser focus on the people at the end of the day is what makes the work so rewarding and why I'm happy to do it here at App.
I've been with App for 6+, almost 7 years, and as a young person, I'm still here. That means the company is evolving to continuously meet my need. You know what I mean? So I love that.
We are connected by our values and committed to excellence in everything we do. It's the Apt difference.
People are connected now more than ever before. These connections have profound implications for global health. That's why Deloitte is bringing our collective experience to deliver improved health to people across the globe. It takes end-to-end supply chain visibility, analytics, and keen understanding of local health needs to deliver medical supplies and technology from the manufacturer to the patient, whether they are in remote villages or bustling cities. For decades, Deloitte's experts have harnessed the latest technologies to improve international healthcare supply chains. Each person, community, and country is unique. Together, we build networks that enhance access and equity, improve patient care, reduce supply chain risks, and leverage public-private partnerships. From designing and implementing global control towers that track medical commodities and analyze key data, to supporting healthcare transformation, Deloitte knows that success is measured one patient at a time. That's why Deloitte combines supply chain technology innovation with local knowledge to deliver improved health and well-being anywhere in the world.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, greetings to all who have joined us from every corner of the globe for SID-Washington's 2021 annual conference. I'm Catherine Rafelson, President of the Society for International Development's Washington chapter, known to most as SID-Washington, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our second ever virtual conference. Those who joined us last year know that we have a great platform that allows for a lot of interaction. Our platform provider, TechChange, has made some fantastic technical advances that will make this year's conference even more engaging. For example, I can actually see all of you right now, and what you're wearing. It's really amazing. I particularly like Paul Gannett's outfit today. But back to our conference. Our theme this year is Mind the Gap. Recalibrate for equity and impact. We have keynotes, plenaries, fireside chats, breakout sessions, learning labs, discussion boards, and roundtables planned throughout the next 2 days. We also have an interactive exhibit hall, networking sessions, and an innovation showcase. Our topics range from diversity, equity, and inclusion to local funding, private sector engagement, education, technology and innovation, climate change, and so much more. I'll explain later this morning how it will all work. First, I want to acknowledge the organizations who have made this event possible. Thank you to all of our 45 sponsors. In particular, I'd like to thank our gold sponsors, Broadreach and the Conrad Hilton Foundation, our platinum sponsors, Accenture, ACD-IVOCA, Chemonics, Creative Associates, DAI, DT Global, RTI, and Tetra Tech, and our diamond sponsors, Apt Associates, Deloitte, and TechChange. We are grateful for your support and partnership, especially during a year that has posed so many challenges. It's been a difficult year for us at SID-Washington, as it has for so many, if not all, of you too. We are so glad that you are taking the time today to listen, to learn, to reflect, and to share as we all try to emerge from the pandemic and continue the important work of improving lives around the world. We all have a lot to share with one another, and I hope you will take full advantage of the many ways to engage. Now, I want to turn the virtual mic over to Wade Warren, SID-Washington's esteemed board chair and Chief Strategy Officer for International Development at Deloitte Consulting. Over to you, Wade.
Thank you, Catherine, and hello to all of you who are participating in this annual conference of the Washington chapter of the Society for International Development. As Catherine mentioned, I'm Wade Warren, and I'm the chair of SID's Board of Directors and the Chief Strategy Officer for International Development at Deloitte Consulting. The board and the SID staff have been working tirelessly for weeks to prepare for this conference, and you are in store for some great conversations on topics that are foremost priorities for the development community. We're holding this conference virtually, just as we seem on the verge of returning to some semblance of normal life in the United States. But of course, our thoughts go out to our friends and colleagues in India and other places around the world that are being devastated by the virus. As I think over the past year, I'm struck by the challenges facing our world. The COVID-19 pandemic and the worldwide movement for racial equity underscore the work that lies ahead. I believe that we are at an inflection point where the ways we deliver assistance must and will change. The pandemic has demonstrated that we can rely on virtual delivery and local actors much more than we ever tried before. And issues around racial equity compel us to give more decision-making to those our programs are designed to assist. And so it seems to me this conference is extremely timely. We need an inclusive forum for discussing smart ideas. We need everyone's creativity and determination if we're going to close the gap. I am therefore greatly looking forward to the coming 2 days. I want to close by expressing my appreciation to everyone who has worked so hard to make this conference possible. I'm particularly grateful to this year's sponsors and to the conference co-chairs, John Glover and Ann Simmons-Benton. They have put in long hours to create an exceptional experience. So now let me pass the mic to Ann. Ann Simmons-Benton is the deputy chair of SID's board and a principal at Deepwater Point. Over to you, Ann, and I look forward to seeing you all again in a few minutes as I hold a virtual conversation with USAID's Mark Feierstein.
Thank you, Wade. I'm excited to welcome and thank all our participants around the world for being with us today to participate in the SID-Washington Annual Conference. Whether as a speaker, a panelist, or a participant, we are here today as a community, a global community, focusing on international development and working purposefully to improve lives around the world. Over the years, international development providers and development agencies have worked on addressing the SDGs: poverty, hunger, climate, education, economic growth, governance, innovation, and digital solutions, etc. In doing so, we have utilized many types of approaches: holistic and systemic approaches, donor-driven approaches, ground up, top down, it goes on. Now, because of the COVID pandemic, the world stopped. There's been suffering and loss of life of such magnitude that could not be addressed based on existing solutions and without collaboration. And still, the suffering continues as we strive to get supplies and vaccines all over the world to where they're needed. We do have an opportunity, though, if we seize it, a learning opportunity, and then a time for action, a time to come together over the next 2 days to share, rethink, and collaborate for action. The theme of the conference, Mind the Gap, comes from the British Metro's call out at the stations to not fall between the car and the platform. During this conference, I want you to look at the gap in 2 distinct ways. First, it is exactly that gap we want to analyze today and tomorrow, using what we learned from the quiet, the silence, and the pause of regular human activity to discover things that worked and also did not work during the pandemic. Is there something we can learn from this time? We must be actively reflective. Did countries move forward without donor models? Did we all learn A new way to work together and collaborate without being in the office or even in another country? Did we learn to listen better or not? Secondly, is there something new that we have perceived during the pandemic about the traditional way of delivering assistance that doesn't work or could be done differently? Is the way that we manage development too siloed? Siloed according to subject matter and siloed by not including collaboration of all the necessary partners. Many of the panels will explore that today and tomorrow. For example, why do we often separate workforce preparation, vocational training, and higher education? Shouldn't the three be more aligned? How do we ensure that education is equitable and teaches respect for others' human rights? How do we ensure that there really are local voices and many different voices through more diverse leadership? We talk about the role of the private sector as an additional partner, not a main actor. In the private sector engagement panel, one of my sheroes, Hala Thomasdottir, will exhort us to take what she termed radical collaboration as a way to bridge this gap. And finally, we know that climate crises impact people differently. How do we discuss climate change without looking at equity as a necessary piece of the solution? That brings me to the second part of the conference theme, past the listening and the reflection of the gap, but seizing the opportunity of the gap with purpose. The group gathered virtually here for this conference are development practitioners, and they are an action-oriented community and want to create change for the betterment of all. Our conference committee has chosen as the central purpose for our gathering today to explore how best to move forward past the status quo and recalibrate for equity and impact. We have chosen these two areas, equity and impact, because both the COVID pandemic and the recent global social justice and Black Lives Matter movements shows that equity is paramount, and by using diversity, equity, inclusion, we will achieve greater impact. So how do we succeed? This conference will only be a success if we hear each of your voices, if you are active participants, and if you resolve to take something home and put it into action. I know you are tired of virtual meetings and conferences, but to be together now with so many individuals from different countries is unique. So I would ask you not to multitask today and tomorrow and stay engaged. Be provocative, be intentional, and push each other and us to truly analyze the gaps and recalibrate to reach a better outcome for equity and impact. Before we move into the main plenary, I want to thank our speakers, panelists, and you, the participants, for your contributions. Additionally, I want to thank SID's amazing CEO, Catherine Rafelson, and the conference committee. My co-chair, John Glover, Plan International USA, Susan Chodakowicz, Nathan Associates, Roger Ford, Accenture Development Partnerships, Chizzy Igwe, Greater Washington Partnership, Mark Johnson, Tetra Tech, Marshall Stoll, the Conrad Hilton Foundation, and of course, Catherine's team at SID, Jamal Seaforth, Julie Montgomery, Megan Dixon, and Paul Sherman. Enjoy the day. Listen, be bold, and take action. Now, to start us off, I would like to introduce our first session, a fireside chat with USAID's Principal Advisor to the Administrator, Mark Feierstein. SID-Washington's Board Chair, Wade Warren, will hold the discussion with Mark. Many of you, of course, know Wade. He had a long history with USAID, over 27 years in a broad range of senior management positions in the Bureaus for Policy Planning and Learning, Global Health, and Africa, as well as serving in USAID's missions in Zimbabwe and Botswana, and as acting administrator. Since 2018, Wade has been the Chief Strategy Officer for International Development at Deloitte Consulting. Over to you, Wade.
Hello again, and thanks, Anne, for that introduction. I'm delighted to kick off SID's 2021 conference with a keynote conversation with USAID's Mark Feierstein. Mark's bio is on the conference website, but I have to tell you a few things about him. First, he's Principal Advisor to the USAID Administrator, with the authorities of the Deputy Administrator, a position that he is graciously filling while we're waiting for a Deputy Administrator to be nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate. This is Mark's third stint at USAID. Under the Obama administration, he was Assistant Administrator for Latin America and the Caribbean. And during the Clinton administration, he served as Director of USAID's Office of Global Elections. Mark has worked at the National Security Council, at the State Department, at the National Democratic Institute, as a journalist and as a consultant. He's an avid baseball fan, and I understand from his staff that his proudest accomplishment is throwing a Little League no-hitter. So hello, Mark. It's so nice to see you again. Thank you so much for returning to government service, and thanks for agreeing to sit down with me for a discussion about USAID.
Well, thanks, Wade, and I very much appreciate that generous introduction, and anyone who references my no-hitter gets extra points, so delighted to be here.
Good. Well, we have only about a half an hour for this conversation, so let's jump right in. You and I worked together when you were in the agency during the Obama administration, and now you're back. I'd love to hear your impressions this time around. What are your initial thoughts now that you've returned, and how are the world and the agency different now from what they were then? Sure. Well, I'm very excited to be back. And in fact, I miss you. In fact, when I think about my previous stint at USAID, I imagine us all sitting around the Point Forward conference room and you weighing in seriously with your deep analysis. But I know you're playing a very, very important role outside USAID now. So as you said, this is my third time at USAID. It was a political appointee in the Clinton administration, and then under Obama, and now again, which might be a record. I'm not sure if there's ever been a three-time political appointee at USAID, and we'll see maybe if I go for a fourth in the future. But I'm not alone. I mean, we have a lot of returning appointees, and I think it speaks to the passion that we all have for USAID and its mission. And for my part, I've worked at the NSC, I've worked at state, as you said, and I think there's really no better place to work than USAID, and there's no other foreign affairs agency that can make a tangible difference in people's lives around the world. And I would say the same about our other partners, about the folks attending this conference. I think another thing that makes working at USAID so pleasurable are the partners we have around the world, and the level of talent is extraordinary, and the dedication that you all have to operate in some of the most difficult environments around the globe is really admirable. Like during the Obama administration, I'm working for an administration that values development. And we have people here who understand throughout the interagency, understand that development serves our interests. And I had the privilege during the Obama administration of working fairly closely with then Vice President Biden. And I attended a lot of meetings with him and a lot about development. He's someone who gets it, he values it. And I think the best case that I ever heard for USAID and its mission was the speech that Joe Biden gave commemorating the agency's 50th anniversary in 2011. You probably remember that. You can all get it on YouTube. It's still there. But the president is also realistic about development. He understands the constraints we face around the world, that we can't impose development, but that we need good partners in the countries where we operate. But I think that his appointees at state, at NSC, at Treasury, Commerce, throughout the administration really are fully committed to development. And we're getting, as an agency, a lot of support from the White House and from other agencies. But in terms of how the world has changed since I was last here, so I started here 10 years ago in the Obama administration. That was really a very hopeful time. Not to be partisan, but I think Obama's election created a great sense of hope in many countries around the world. We were going through the early days of the Arab Spring. We were seeing, dividends from years of investment in PEPFAR and the malaria initiative. Back then, China, India were pulling hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And you may recall, books were being written about the end of global poverty, and that we were on the verge of potentially eliminating poverty in the world. And, we had challenges, of course, in this country and around the world, but America's standing in the world and our willingness to lead wasn't one of them. Well, now it's a very different environment. And many people around the world question America's commitment to the global order. And President Biden talked about this in his speech to the joint session of Congress. And of course, we're battling the worst pandemic in 100 years, which has erased years of development gains,
We had 4 years of lost effort on climate. We seem to have severe weather events, every day. We're dealing with an emboldened China, an emboldened Russia, or Russia supporting autocrats and weakening democracies from within. And unfortunately, the world's not as resilient as the United States is. The United States is on its way back. Our economy is growing fast, unemployment's come down, people are getting support they need. And that's obviously not the case around the world. So I think our work is even more important as a result. And the president and his staff understand that to build back better at home requires success abroad. We have to defeat COVID and help countries rebound economically to support our ability to build back better here. And I think, or hope, that the American public understands, better now how events around the world impact us. They've seen issues like COVID. They're seeing an issue like, Central American migration. And I hope that people appreciate now that the consequences for us of developments overseas. And so we must prevail in our international development efforts. And I think, American leadership, USAID will be central to those efforts. But I should say, just in terms of the agency, I'm really impressed, with how the agency is managed during COVID. I come in every day. I'm in the office right now. Most of the staff tend to work from home, but we're responding effectively as well as we did, 5 years ago when I was here, 10 years ago when I was here. It's really extraordinary, our ability, to operate remotely under very, very difficult circumstances. And yet, we're at the forefront of the response to COVID around the world and South Asia today. We're at the forefront of the response to the humanitarian crisis in Tigray. I can go on and list this, but I'm just very impressed with the ability of the employees of the agency to withstand what they've gone through personally, what we've gone through there as a country and as an agency, and to continue to do their terrific work.
Thanks, Mark. Well, as I said, we're delighted that you have decided to come back to the agency 3 times, and that may well be a record. I mentioned in the introduction to the conference a few minutes ago, and then you touched on yourself, all the challenges that the world is facing right now. We're emerging from this terrible year of COVID. There's a long overdue emphasis on racial equity. There's economic backsliding in many countries because of the pandemic, as you mentioned. It's a lot to tackle. And Administrator Power is newly confirmed. She's on seat now. Everyone's delighted about that. Can you talk to us a little bit about her priorities and what you see as the main things that the agency needs to focus on in the coming year?
So it is a lot to tackle, and I'll list 3 things, and it doesn't mean that these other things aren't important, but I think there are 3 areas that really impact everything that we're doing. And they're really the 3 C's. It's COVID, it's climate change, and corruption. And in terms of corruption, it's really more broadly the democratic backsliding that we're seeing around the world and the rise in autocracy. In terms of COVID, I think thanks to the Biden administration and President Biden's leadership, finally life is returning to normal somewhat here. I'm in the office now. Other people are starting to come back. But obviously, we're confronting variants around the world, and there are continued outbreaks, and those outbreaks anywhere can threaten lives everywhere, including here. So we're far from done, even though people are feeling more comfortable in Washington D.C. and around our country. So we're investing billions to secure and deploy vaccines around the world. We've been purchasing life-saving medicine. We've been providing PPE. We're helping to boost testing in more than 60 countries. I'm sure you all heard recently the announcement from the Biden administration that we're going to share 80 million doses with the world. We've already committed $4 billion to COVAX, and COVAX is delivering on a regular basis vaccines to countries around the world. Obviously, nowhere is that more urgent today than in India. I'm sure you're all following this. And really now it's spreading beyond India into other countries and in South Asia. I think thankfully we're starting to see some leveling off of cases there, but that really could change on any given day. And we're concerned that the peak in deaths and hospitalizations is still a ways away. So it's very much an evolving situation. And as we know, countries that had seemingly controlled the virus, countries that had opened up, were feeling pretty comfortable, are now facing outbreaks. So the virus and its consequences are going to be with us for some time. And that's why we at USAID, we have a COVID task force led by Jeremy Konendijk, Gail Smith, of course, the former USAID administrator, is leading the effort at the State Department. So it's really a very, very serious effort that we are leading. In terms of climate change, we all know that there's a global existential crisis that threatens lives, it threatens health, it threatens our economic progress, it threatens our very survival. And in terms of development, it threatens our developmental progress. It exacerbates global inequities. And climate change, as we know, disproportionately affects the most vulnerable. We've seen an increase in food and water scarcity. We've seen a terrible increased need for humanitarian assistance. We've seen increased displacement. And of course, climate change contributes to conflict as well. So climate change has to be at the heart of the development agenda. It's not merely about climate, it's about all of its impacts. So I think USAID is very well positioned to support the administration's fairly bold climate agenda and help to implement the Paris Agreement. And of course, the agenda is designed to support partners to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and to reach net zero carbon, ideally by 2050. So we at AID, we have climate programs in about 45 countries, and that includes a whole range of work. We help countries develop markets for clean technology. We help to develop climate-friendly solutions for various challenges. We invest a lot in climate-smart agriculture. We're doing forest conservation. And unfortunately, yes, we're delivering a lot of humanitarian assistance in response to disasters such as cyclones and famine and drought. And then in terms of democracy and in particular the anti-corruption effort, we all know democratic governance, human rights are critical to sustainable development and peace. And democracy is in crisis around the globe. We've all seen the Freedom House trends, and they're pretty bad. And there are other units, other organizations that track democracy as well, and the trend is not a positive one. And in particular, we're seeing corruption, weakening our partners around the world, and it really, corruption impedes our ability to be effective in development. And whether it's global health, education, food security, economic development, it hits all those areas. And corruption also leaves nations vulnerable to malign foreign actors. And I think we're all familiar with the Chinese development model, which creates dependence. It undermines labor rights, damages the environment, but also undermines transparency. But corruption really, angers people too. And part of the reason that we've seen a record number of protests around the world last year is because of corruption. I think half of the protests globally last year were driven by concerns about corruption. And 5 of those protests were successful in toppling governments. So this administration is committed to restoring democracy and human rights, really at the center of U.S. foreign policy and making it the center and putting it at the center of the work of USAID. President Biden himself has long recognized corruption as a national security issue, and he's pledged to make anti-corruption central to the Summit of Democracy that he'll be hosting. Programmatically for AID, it means identifying reformers with whom we can work around the world, and that could mean civil society and supporting their efforts to expose corruption, to combat corruption. I think it also means identifying ministries or certain people in ministries that we can work with, because even corrupt governments, might have worthy people that we can work with, and we want to identify them and strengthen them. There may be an independent attorney general, for example, or a Supreme Court. And I think that the press, the media, plays a real important role here too. And as you know, USAID provides a lot of support to independent media around the world. And independent media can expose corruption. And we're seeing one of the main reasons that autocratic governments are shutting down independent media is because they're exposing wrongdoing, they're exposing corruption. So it's important, and I think this administration is going to do this, to provide, on the one hand, diplomatic support for anti-corruption efforts, but we also need practical support that comes from USAID as well. I mean, those are just a few of the cross-cutting issues we're focused on here. obviously, we're also dealing with the crises of the day. Can't list them all, but I underscore Afghanistan, for example, is something we're very, very focused on as U.S. troops leave, and ensuring that we're able to continue to support the Afghan people, and especially women and girls. I would note the Northern Triangle, of course, where we're trying to work with countries there to reduce the need and incentive for residents there to migrate. I mentioned Ethiopia, humanitarian crisis there we're responding to. So there's really a mix of longer term thematic priorities, but also day-to-day crises that we have to manage. But that's international affairs, that's government service, and that's working at USAID.
Well, thank you, Mark. That is a daunting list, but we really appreciate the tour of the horizon there from your perspective. It's very helpful to hear. I wanted to get you to talk a little bit about Administrator Power's position on the National Security Council. It's unprecedented in the agency's history. We know that having USAID at the NSC will help to ensure that development priorities are at the forefront of policymaking, and the decisions taken at the NSC don't undercut USAID programs in any way. So that's all great. I'm hearing from the USAID staff that there's been a dramatic increase in work related to agency meetings. So can you put this all in perspective for us? What does it mean?
Sure. Well, look, Samantha Power is an extraordinary professional. She wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book at age 30, I think. I believe that she worked at the NSC. I think then she was the youngest U.S. ambassador to the UN in history. I think she was early 40s. So to appoint someone like her as administrator, to nominate and get someone like her confirmed, I think speaks to the Biden administration's recognition of the critical importance of development and the prominent role that USAID is going to play in U.S. foreign policy. And what we add in terms of value to the interagency process, I think, is that no other agency can provide, in terms of the longevity and intimacy of our operations around the globe. We have a long-term development focus, obviously. We've operated in countries for decades, in some cases for 6 decades, since we began as an agency. Our people have vast knowledge of dynamics on the ground. We draw from a robust force of Foreign Service nationals, and we have deep connections to the communities we serve abroad. No other agency has all that. And I think that more than any other agency, we operate at the nexus of our values and interests. So we do life-saving and humanitarian work, but we're also a government agency. We manage taxpayer money. Development's not a charity. It's not charity. We carry this out in our interest as well. So the resolution of so many of the big foreign policy challenges that we face around the world requires development. Diplomacy is necessary but not sufficient to deal with most of those challenges. Defense, the military, when needed, in most cases, is not sufficient. And so I'll take 2 examples I referenced before. We take Northern Triangle. Reducing illegal migration requires getting at the root causes. And USAID is the principal agency working at that. I mentioned Afghanistan before. The U.S. troops are leaving, but this administration is committed to supporting the Afghan people, especially girls and women. Well, it's USAID that's going to be at the forefront of that effort. We've already talked about COVID, which is the issue of our time, and USAID has a central role there. So on issues like these and more, we are at the policy table. I attend multiple deputy committee meetings every week. Sometimes there's 2 to 3 a day. And Administrator Power is attending principals meetings. Now, as for the increase in prep for these meetings, I hope I'm not that hard to prepare. But, we take our role seriously. And we think expansively beyond the narrow development lens. Samantha Power was ambassador to the UN. She worked at the NSC. She was a Pulitzer Prize winner. So, she's got a lot to contribute to the policy discussion. And I think the NSC and the State Department and others have been very, very welcome of our participation in the interagency. And I should say it's not just the principals and deputies committee meetings. We're seeing, USAID staff being very assertive as well at the level of IPCs, at the level of the assistant administrators or acting assistant administrators, We're seeing a lot of activity at the sub-IPC level. So I think really across the board, USAID staff are sort of taking this knowledge they have and applying it at the nexus of policy and development.
That's great. This is great to hear. I want to ask you about two White House priorities. You've alluded to them already: Building Back Better and the executive order on advancing racial equity. These are enormously important concepts, but I suspect that an agency that's focused internationally is not able to implement them in the same way that domestic agencies are. Can you talk a little bit about how these two initiatives will work at USAID?
Sure. Well, in terms of Building Back Better, I think that takes us a little bit back to the COVID issue, and I'll speak a little bit to that and provide maybe some more detail. So, as I noted, I think the pandemic has taught Americans why conditions overseas matter. And I noted as well, and we know that our country won't succeed in building back better at home unless we defeat COVID globally and the economies abroad, rebound. And the administration understands that. So the president announced that we're going to be leading the world's global vaccination effort against COVID-19 by providing 8 million doses overseas by the end of June. That's 5 times more than any other country has shared to date. We've contributed, as I noted, billions of dollars to fight COVID, more than 120 countries already. We've pledged the $4 billion to COVAX. We're working to secure commitments from other countries and the private sector because we can't do this alone, and governments alone can't do it. We need the private sector engaged. We need foundations engaged. So the successful international and domestic effort that's made America safer already, I think, is now going to ensure that the world is safer from COVID-19 as well. And President Biden said something to the effect of that, we were the arsenal of democracy in World War II, and now we're going to be the arsenal of vaccines. So I think in partnership with other democracies, we're going to lead the world out of this pandemic, and we're going to help to build back better globally. And that means, not just solving this pandemic crisis, but it means preparing for future ones because we know more are coming. And so we need to help countries prepare to prevent, to detect, and respond to future biological threats. I think that's what we're doing, with our work here, which is, both a combined immediate response, but also helping to lay the groundwork, as we've done for decades in our global health work, helping to improve health systems overall. In terms of the diversity effort, look, President Biden's built the most diverse administration in U.S. history. And I'd also say it's the most talented. And as we discussed, I've served in 2 previous administrations. They were very talented administrations as well. But I can say that based on the professionals that I've met thus far at USAID and throughout government, there's never been a more talented administration in American history. For us at the agency, and really for the administration, the diversity effort is a top priority, and we need to live up to our values. So our mission to ensure global prosperity, tackle the toughest challenges, that starts with empowering our staff and by providing a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment for everyone to operate. So on Administrator Power's first day, she signed our what's called our DEI strategy, to hold the agency accountable. And that establishes new recruiting pathways to make sure that we have a diverse staff here that reflects America, it looks like America. It lays out plans to ensure that we have hiring and promotion pathways that are free of bias. We're building in diversity training and competencies into putting our competencies into performance evaluations as well. And the administrator is committed to ensuring that this is not just a check the box exercise, that we have to live these values as an agency, because these are values that we promote around the world, and we can't just give lip service to them. We have to live them, and if we live them, we'll be able to share them as well with our partners around the world.
Great, thanks. Mark. I wish I had time now to go around the world region by region and ask you specific questions, and we don't have time to do that. But I do want to talk to you about the Northern Triangle. You mentioned it earlier, and I know you have such a deep knowledge about Central America. I'd love to hear your perspectives on the Northern Triangle. Over the years, we've had the Third Border Initiative, the Central America Free Trade Agreement. We've had programs that have focused on community policing to help prevent violent gangs. And I'd be interested in what's the new focus, and also what do you think has worked from the past that we could build on now?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So, as you know, I've worked for a number of decades on Latin America and on Central America. And I had the privilege in the previous administration, the Obama administration, of when I was at AID and then the NSC, work directly with the then Vice President on the issue. So President Biden has a long-standing engagement on Central America, and he led the effort in the region for President Obama. He understands that the only way we're going to combat illegal migration over time is to get at the root causes, and that's why he's announced this 4-year, $4 billion effort. And we're working on as a government on the Central American strategy that will be released publicly fairly soon. But he was very effective when he was vice president, and I saw him extract commitments from Central American leaders, basically in effect conditioning our aid on steps that they had to take. I saw his ability to work on a bipartisan basis from Congress. In fact, the only reason that we got the large amount of money that we did at the end of the Obama administration was because of then Vice President's personal lobbying efforts with Democrats and Republicans. People just trusted him. Now, of course, Vice President Harris is taking the lead. I think it's important people understand development takes time. There's no silver bullet here. We're not going to solve the migration challenge overnight. And Central America is a pretty tough environment. And let's be honest, we don't have ideal government partners there, needless to say. And in many cases, there's a private sector there that has not contributed to broader development. Though I think there's some evidence that may be changing in some ways. But the evidence suggests that we can make progress. And I think during the Obama administration, we were making progress. For example, if you look at some of the crime prevention programs that AID was doing jointly with the State Department and INL, and we found that in neighborhoods where we were operating, crime was coming down, relative to places where we were not operating. And I think those are projects worth learning from and trying to replicate on a larger scale. But we lost a lot of that progress over the last few years. And all due respect, but the previous administration, as we know, froze assistance to the region for some time. But they also, beyond just the development, beyond the freeze on assistance, they also turned a blind eye when anti-corruption entities were shut down. And I think that governments in the region, sort of felt free to take anti-democratic moves, and they knew under the previous administration they weren't going to face any consequences. Well, that's changed now. So we have a very, very diplomatic approach, very, very different diplomatic approach that Secretary Blinken is leading. And I think we're revising our approach at AID as well. So we are looking at more creative ways to advance long-term development. We're thinking about efforts that might be able to have a short-term impact as well, that might actually be able to reduce migration in the short term and encourage people to stay at home. So we're still thinking through some of those efforts. And as you know, the Vice President will be traveling to Mexico and to Guatemala in early June. I think it's just a couple weeks away or a week away now. So we'll have a lot more to announce during her trip.
That's great. So we have about 5 minutes left, I think, of time probably for one more question. I wanted to ask you about China. You mentioned China before. China's role in international development is obviously controversial. The previous administration took a hard line, at least rhetorically. Can you tell me a little more about the Biden approach, and how do you think China policy will affect USAID's programming?
Sure. Well, look, there's a lot of attention right now being paid to the sort of the democracy space, or this question of how democracy competes with autocratic models of government, specifically China. The president himself has spoken to this. And so the question for us is, what's the antidote to a country that promises leaders wealth, control, and infrastructure investments, and especially when we know we can't match, dollar for dollar, the Belt and Road Initiative. So what is the antidote to that? And I think the answer is really everything that USAID does, in a way, is the antidote. We don't prop up corrupt leaders. We work to build trust among, at the local level and among community leaders. We strengthen free press. We bolster human rights advocates. We equip, community leaders, civil society to hold their leaders accountable. Those are all things that, that distinguish us from the way China operates. We don't saddle countries with unsustainable debt. We don't, come in just to extract wealth. We respect, local labor rights. We respect, we try to preserve and respect the environment. And we try to help create local jobs and develop, vibrant private sectors. We're not trying to create economies that are dependent on the United States. We don't censor the media. We support investigative journalism. We welcome it. We welcome, investigative journalism here. We welcome it overseas as well. And we work to fight misinformation and disinformation. We don't circulate it. So I think, around the world, citizens everywhere cherish their independence. They cherish their natural resources. They cherish the chance to determine their own futures and not be dependent on other countries. And I think that gives us an advantage over China. And that's why we see in public opinion polling around the world. As you know, I'm a former pollster, but we've seen polling around the world that despite China's blank checks and their infrastructure investments, popular opinion still has not swung their way. People still want to integrate with the United States. They want to engage with the United States. They want to come here to study. They want to come here to work. So we shouldn't lose confidence in our approach. We need to remain vigilant, but we need to be confident about what we're doing and in the alternative that we are offering. And I feel confident that ultimately the vision and model that we are offering is the one that's going to win out globally.
That's great, Mark, and that's a very hopeful note to end on. I wish we had time to talk another half hour. I've really enjoyed hearing everything you've had to say. As I said at the outset, I'm so delighted that you've come back to USAID and lending the agency all your years of experience. Appreciate so much that you sat down and talked with us to kick this conference off. No, thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Great.
Thank you, Mark and Wade. That set the stage beautifully for what we have ahead in our breakout sessions, learning labs, plenaries, roundtable discussions, and other features of this year's conference. We have a really full agenda for the next 2 days, and I want to make sure you can get to our next sessions on time, but I also want to explain a bit about how everything will work. Last year, gathering in this way was fairly new to most of us, but by now it's old hat, and we're used to seeing one another from the waist up with a variety of backgrounds. You're all probably familiar with navigating virtual conferences, but I want to make sure you know the basics of our platform so that you don't miss anything. Most of what you need to know is under the What to Expect tabs on our homepage. Please take a moment to look at those. Perhaps the most important tab is the Agenda tab on the menu at the top of your screen, which I'm guessing you found since you're here listening to me now. Everything you need to know about the program is under this tab. Highlights include a plenary later today focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, a plenary tomorrow on climate change, breakout sessions and learning labs today and tomorrow on a wide range of topics, and a closing plenary tomorrow on the pandemic. I hope you've all found the Participants tab. If you have not already done so, click on that to see a map showing where all our attendees are from. As you will see, we have people from every corner of the globe representing more than 50 countries. You can zoom in on the map to see exactly where everyone is from and you can click on people to connect via chat or LinkedIn. If you haven't set up your profile yet, please do so others can find you. You do that by clicking on the circle on the top right of your screen and selecting profile. And you can add a photo, your social media information, and more. Think of this as your name tag and your business card. And then we have a number of ways for you to use your profiles to engage with one another via chat, but we also have sessions for engaging via video in real time. From 12 to 1 Eastern Time on both days, you can join our sponsors in our interactive exhibit hall for networking. Tomorrow, we'll also have roundtable discussions from 12 to 1 on a variety of topics. And then we'll have open networking at 3 p.m. Eastern Time today and at 9 a.m. tomorrow to try to accommodate various time zones. So please try to stop by. Also, you can rack up points for the different ways you engage. You'll see our top users listed on the homepage, and that list changes by the minute. We'll acknowledge the person with the highest points at our closing plenary tomorrow. Also at our closing plenary tomorrow, we'll announce the winners of our innovation contest. Like last year, we have an innovation showcase featuring our 5 contest finalists, and you can see their work in our ideas library, as well as in a 3D world that we're experimenting with this year. Our finalists will also answer questions on a panel tomorrow. You can vote for your favorite innovations by going to the Innovation Showcase tab in the Platform Navigation Guide on your Home tab. And this is also where you'll find the 3D Innovation Showcase that I mentioned. Please also check out our discussion boards in our Ideas Library, as well as our Lightning Talk entries. And I really can't possibly cover everything. Please just take time to explore the platform and see what we have for you. You can also come back after hours and access recordings, libraries, and other features at any time. If you have questions, simply go to the Help section on the Home tab. So that's the crash course. Please start picking your next sessions on our agenda, and I hope to see you in about an hour in our interactive exhibit hall. And now, to close our morning session, I want to show you one of the winners of our Lightning Talks contest. Morgan Mickle from Banyan Global on the art of cross-cutting in international development, 5 lessons for taking it to the next level.
I can honestly say I love my job. I work for Banyan Global, a woman-owned small business, and serve as a technical specialist in the gender and youth practice, leading integration work for portfolio projects where gender equality, positive youth development, and social inclusion are common cross-cutting themes. When I started, I can remember my mom asking, "But what do you do?" Her words parallel how even some in the international development community view cross-cutting work: uncertain. So here's my big question. Do we as development practitioners truly understand what cross-cutting is and what it really looks like in practice? Today, I'm going to share with you 5 lessons I've gained from being a cross-cutter. I recently looked through all the results frameworks and CDCSs listed on USAID's website to see what themes were most commonly listed as cross-cutting. Yes, I counted them. Of the 54 documents on the site, there were more than 20 different technical areas listed as cross-cutting. So let's start with the definition. I browsed through a couple resources from varying international development organizations. One from the website, Proposals for NGOs, however, really stuck with me. Simple, clear, and easy to understand. Cross-cutting themes are additional issues that intersect with the main project or can be easily integrated into the project without losing focus of the main goal. Another way to think of cross-cutting is how a project focused on climate may have gender or youth implications as well. So this is cross-cutting, but how do we do it well? I've got 5 suggestions derived from my experience as a cross-cutter that can be applied by any development professional to help bridge the gap between policy and implementation. First, dedicate the necessary resources, both financial and human, to set your team up for success. If you have a project that spans several regions, consider regionally based technical focal points. On the USAID-funded Feed the Future Ethiopia value chain activity, our gender and youth team is co-led by a manager in the home office, one in the country capital, and gender and youth experts across each implementing region, allowing us to maximize reach and impact. Second, avoid tokenism and treat the cross-cutting theme as a whole of project responsibility. While a project may have a technical lead for the associated cross-cutting theme, it's important that the project's leadership promotes and communicates that the cross-cutting issue is as important as other project components. If this is not communicated from the beginning and throughout implementation, the cross-cutting theme may become an afterthought, and this puts the overall goals and impact at risk. Third, engage teams early and often and develop strong relationships from the start. For cross-cutting work to be successful, you must negotiate with other teams on a daily basis. It's a lot easier to work together if there's mutual respect and understanding for each other's roles and goals. On the USAID-funded Impact Program, a health supply chain project in Madagascar, we on the GESI team organized individual and targeted conversations not only with the chief of party and deputy, but with each intermediate result lead and team. Then those conversations were used for annual activity planning and tracking. Fourth, maintain a long-term perspective and build quality results over time. It's very easy with cross-cutting work to jump in very fast. You're trying to show your value to every objective up front so you'll be considered for future collaboration. But for a project with 5 objectives, trying to do several activities under each of the 5 in 1 year is unrealistic, inefficient, and does not set the project up for best success. Instead, start with a few activities and then build those out over the course of the project. This approach allows focus for developing quality activities from the start, which can be adapted and adjusted as learning continues, and more holistic impact at the end of the project period. Finally, be strategic and integrate the cross-cutting focus throughout the project structure. Most often than not, I've seen in activity work plans, X, Y, Z, and then a section on gender. Structures like these can promote other technical teams to say, oh, well, that's gender. Consider promoting structures that allow your cross-cutting team to, on the one hand, integrate activities across all technical areas, and on the other, deliver select activities addressing the specific cross-cutting area, such as a women's and leadership training. So that was a lot of information, but I'll leave you with this main takeaway. Carrying out cross-cutting work effectively is challenging. It's easy to rely on changes that don't threaten the norm, but if one truly wants to improve results in cross-cutting areas, they must mind the gap and take action. I found these tips helpful in making my work impactful, and by sharing them with you today, I hope I've paved the way for you to recalibrate and discover your own inner cross-cutter.